Mud clung to the hooves of horses like regret. The auction yard was noisy with grunts, shouting men, restless hooves, and the hollow crack of wooden gates slamming shut. Dust rose with every movement, thick in the air, sticking to clothes, eyes, and silence. No one noticed the small, frail Colt standing alone in the corner pen, his ribs visible beneath patchy, mud-smeared fur. He didn't call out. He didn't move. He barely blinked. He looked too young to be there, too thin to matter. A ghost of a horse, forgotten before he'd had a chance to live. The auctioneer's voice boomed, rattling numbers and breeds with practiced force. Quarter horse gelding, 5 years, healthy. Who'll start me at 600? 600. His words were sharp and fast, but the Colt never flinched. Others around him shifted, anxious or eager, ears flicking at the noise. The Colt remained still, as if he had long stopped expecting anything at all. A boy passed by, holding a soda. He laughed and pointed. That one looks dead. His father chuckled. Might as well be. Worth less than the rope he's tied with. Someone shouted, throw him in for free with the next mare. A man with a cigarette stepped close, tapped the metal bars with his boot, and sneered. Poor runt. Firewood on legs. The Colt's ears flicked back slightly, the only response he gave. On the far side of the pen, beyond the vendors and shouting buyers, stood a woman who hadn't spoken once all morning. She was older, late 60s maybe, wearing jeans caked with dust, boots worn from years of use, and a faded denim jacket that hung loosely over her frame. Her gray-streaked hair was pulled back under a straw hat, and in her eyes was a quiet weight, the kind born from long years of loss. She hadn't planned to buy anything. She hadn't planned to come at all. Her pickup truck still idled outside the gate, the engine ticking as it cooled. But something had pulled her here, like an invisible thread tugging at the empty place in her chest she never spoke of. She looked over horses the way a sculptor might study broken marble, seeing not what they were, but what they could be. Still, nothing moved her. Until she saw him. She paused mid-step, staring toward the far pen. The noise of the auction faded. All she could see was the Colt, thin legs too small for his body, his coat a mess of dried sweat and dirt. But it was his eyes that stopped her. They were too still. Not frightened, not wild, just resigned. She walked toward him. A worker noticed. You interested in that one? He asked, brushing dust from his clipboard. He's not officially listed. Well, we're supposed to haul him out back after the main lots. No takers. Weak lungs. Probably shouldn't have lived past the first week. What's his name? She asked softly. The worker frowned. Doubt he has one. She didn't answer. She stepped closer, resting a hand lightly on the railing. The Colt didn't back away. He didn't approach either. He just looked at her with those still, dark eyes, as if he'd already known her. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a single sugar cube she always kept for habit's sake, and held it out on her palm. The Colt hesitated. A slight flicker of something in his expression, a question, maybe. Slowly, tentatively, he stepped forward. His muzzle brushed her fingers. He took the cube gently, almost apologetically. Behind her, the next horse sold for $1,200. She turned to the worker. How much? He blinked. For him? You serious? I'm serious. He scratched his head. $2. Just to log it as sold. She pulled 2 crumpled bills from her back pocket. Sold then. People were watching. A few snickered. One man shook his head. Old fool wasting money. She opened the gate herself. The Colt didn't resist when she slipped the halter on. He followed as she led him slowly across the dirt lot, each step unsure, every joint creaking, like old floorboards. Yet he moved. As they approached the trailer, someone called out from the sidelines, half mocking, half curious. Hey, lady, what's his name? She paused, hand resting gently on his neck. He leaned into her touch, not heavy, just enough to say he knew she was real. That she wasn't another dream. She turned her head slightly and answered hope. A hush passed over the crowd, brief and strange, like wind before thunder. Then the noise resumed, but softer somehow. Inside the trailer, she laid down straw, fresh water, and some sweet feed. Hope climbed in slowly, trembling but determined. When the door shut behind him, he gave one soft exhale, then curled into the hay. As she slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, her hand lingered over the steering wheel, trembling. Not from age, but from something else. Something she hadn't felt in a long time. Purpose. She looked in the rearview mirror at the trailer. "Let's get you home," she whispered. And for the first time in years, her voice didn't sound hollow. The road ahead stretched wide, bordered by tall grass and fading sun. Behind her, the auction yard buzzed with more sales, more shouting, more noise. But in her heart, everything had already changed. And somewhere in the straw-lined trailer, a weak, unwanted Colt rested quietly, unaware that his story had just begun. The gate creaked as she pushed it open, revealing the quiet land that had once pulsed with life. The house stood small but steady at the edge of the pasture, its white paint peeling in layers like old memories. To the left, a barn leaned slightly westward from years of wind, still sheltering hay and dust and the echoes of laughter that hadn't been heard in a long time. The ranch had once belonged to her husband and then to her son. Now it belonged to silence. And her. She stepped down from the truck slowly, her back aching, hands stiff from the chill that settled into her bones more easily than it used to. Inside the trailer, the Colt shifted. His hooves clicked against the floor, uncertain, hesitant. "Easy now," she murmured, opening the ramp. Sunlight touched his coat, revealing just how thin he truly was. His hips jutted sharply. His fur was matted where old wounds had scabbed and healed without care. But his eyes held a fragile calmness. Not trust yet, but not fear either. He took one step onto the ramp, wobbled, paused. She stood beside him, offering no rope, no pressure, just presence. After a long breath, he stepped down onto the earth. She guided him toward the barn, the gravel crunching beneath their feet. Inside, she had already prepared a stall, fresh straw, a small heater, a salt block, and a bucket of warm ash. He sniffed the space with a mixture of confusion and disbelief, then slowly lowered his head to eat. She watched in silence, heart swelling with something like hope and fear mixed together. For years, she had walked past this barn with her eyes cast down, unable to face the emptiness. Now, there was a soul inside again. The Colt ate slowly, chewing as if unfamiliar with having enough. "You don't owe me anything," she whispered, brushing the dust from his mane. "You just rest." She named him Hope, but she didn't say it often yet. Names were powerful. He needed to grow into it first. The next morning came with frost on the grass and a soft gray sky. She carried a pail of warm water to the stall and found him awake, standing, ears tilted toward the sound of her boots. He didn't shy away when she entered. A small sign, but it mattered. She brushed him gently, speaking in a soft voice the entire time. Her hands moved with care, over his neck, down his back, around the joints that clicked when he shifted. Every scar was a story she would never fully know, but she acknowledged them, and he let her. He was too weak to walk far, but each day she led him a little farther from the barn, across the yard, down the slight hill to the willow tree where her son used to sit with a guitar and hum songs to their horses. She didn't speak of her son, not yet, but sometimes her voice caught when she looked at that tree. One afternoon, as wind stirred the branches and leaves danced across the paddock, she brought out a faded blanket and sat near the Colt as he grazed. She hummed softly, a lullaby her son had loved when he was a boy. Hope lifted his head at the sound, ears flicking. He came closer and stood near her shoulder, not touching but near. "You remind me of him," she said, though she hadn't meant to speak aloud. "Not how you look. Just the way you're quiet. Like you carry something heavy." Hope exhaled, slow and long. Her hands rested on her knees. He was quiet too, toward the end. After the accident, he didn't talk much. Just rode the horses. Sang when he thought I couldn't hear. She turned her head. Hope was still watching her. "Maybe that's why I couldn't let you go." It became their routine. Mornings in the pasture. Afternoons brushing and feeding. Evenings with her reading old poetry aloud while Hope dozed in his stall. Each day, he moved a little easier, his steps steadier, his gaze more alert. But healing was not a straight line. One morning, after an unexpected thunderstorm had soaked the earth, she found him pacing, restless and agitated. Mud had crept into the stall overnight, soaking the straw. His legs trembled, and when she approached, he reared slightly, not violently, just frightened. She didn't speak. She didn't move. Instead, she knelt, right there in the wet straw, and waited. Minutes passed, then more. Eventually, he stopped pacing. His breathing slowed, and he came to her, dripping and dirty, and lowered his head until it rested just above her shoulder. She exhaled, slow and shaking. "You're okay," she whispered. "We're both okay." That night, she lit the small fireplace in the kitchen and pulled out an old photo album. Pictures of her son smiling wide beside young Colt's, pictures of her late husband hammering fence posts, their life once vibrant. She hadn't opened that album in years. Hope didn't know the history of this place, but his presence stirred it all back up. Not in pain, but in remembrance. It was as if he was helping her carry what she couldn't let go of alone. Late one evening, after a particularly still sunset, she stood in the barn with her hands wrapped around a steaming mug of tea. Hope stood beside her in the stall, chewing lazily. "I think you were meant to come here," she said softly. "Not because you needed saving, but because I did." His ears turned toward her voice. She smiled faintly. "You're more than just bones and fear now. You're starting to become something else. Something strong." A distant owl called from the trees. Hope nudged her hand gently, and she laughed. A light, real sound that hadn't escaped her lips in a long time. In that moment, something shifted, not in the barn, but in her. It wasn't the end of grief, nor the beginning of joy, but something in between. A place where both could exist. She reached into her coat pocket, pulled out a small wooden tag she'd carved the night before, and hooked it gently to the front of his stall. One word, etched with careful hands. Hope. Not a label. A promise. As she stepped outside into the cool night air, the moon rose over the pasture like a watchful eye. The land was still. The house behind her breathed quietly. And in the barn, for the first time in years, there was life again. The wind picked up slightly, rustling the trees, and she turned toward it, a question forming in her mind. Because tomorrow, she would find out just how far Hope could go. The first true test came with the thaw. Winter began to loosen its grip, and thin blades of grass pushed through the earth like promises not yet broken. The woman rose earlier now, her limbs aching less from cold and more from movement. Her body had grown used to the routine again, mornings of hauling buckets, brushing coats, shoveling straw, and leading Hope gently through the softening fields. He had grown stronger. His frame had filled in. Though still small compared to the others, his legs held steadiness now, and his coat, once matted and dull, shimmered faintly gold in the morning sun. But what changed most was his eyes. The emptiness had faded. In its place lived something fragile but fierce, a flickering spirit returning to itself. She walked beside him every day, speaking softly, guiding him through gentle exercises. He learned to respond to her voice, to trust her hands. He let her touch his ears, his hooves, even the scar near his shoulder that had once made him flinch. He still startled at sudden sounds or shadows, but he no longer froze. He moved through the fear now. That was something. But peace, she knew, was temporary, especially here. One morning after their walk, she found a white envelope wedged under the front door. No stamp, no address, just a folded letter inside, a formal notice from the county. Taxes unpaid, backdated, a final warning. She sat on the porch and read it twice, her fingers trembling not from age this time, but from helplessness. She knew it was coming, but seeing it in ink made it real. $10,000. Due in 30 days. Her first instinct was to hide it, pretend the barn could shelter her from it. But Hope nudged the screen door open with his nose, peering in as if he sensed something had cracked. She stood up, brushing the dust from her jeans. "Don't worry, boy," she murmured, tucking the letter in her coat. "We'll find a way." She didn't sleep much that night. Instead, she sat by the fireplace with old ledgers, pawing through paperwork, bills, and faded checkbooks. The math didn't lie. There was no miracle hidden in those pages. The next morning, Hope waited at the gate. He pawed at the earth, eager, expectant. She smiled despite herself. "You're ready for more, aren't you?" So she taught him. She set up barrels in the pasture, guiding him slowly between them. She walked backward through tight circles, using nothing but her voice and small gestures. When he faltered, she stopped and waited. When he succeeded, she whispered praise and scratched beneath his mane. They built trust the way one builds a fire, carefully, patiently, feeding it until it flickered to life. It wasn't just training. It was something more, something sacred. But the world beyond their pasture had its own opinions. When she brought Hope into town for his first checkup with the vet, they had to walk past the general store. A few men loitered outside, nursing coffees, swapping stories. One of them pointed. "That the colt from the auction?" he asked, amused. "Didn't know ghosts could walk." Another chuckled. "I saw her with him last week. Barely moves like a horse. More like a memory." She didn't answer. Just led Hope down the sidewalk, his hooves clicking on the pavement like stubborn heartbeat. At the clinic, the vet inspected him in silence. Checked his lungs, his gait, his reflexes, then pulled her aside. He's healing well. Better than I expected, he admitted. But he's not built for labor or racing. I wouldn't expect miracles. She nodded. I'm not. Later that evening, she stared at the barn door for a long time. Her thoughts twisted like roots, deep, tangled. Could she keep pouring everything into this Colt? What if they lost the land? Would it all vanish? But when she stepped inside, Hope came to her immediately, pressing his forehead gently against her chest. No words could explain what that meant. So she kept going. Day after day, she trained him. Not for show, but for presence, for poise. She taught him balance, patience, awareness. And every evening, she sat by the old willow, watching the sky turn orange as Hope grazed nearby. Then one morning, just as spring began to bloom fully, Hope panicked. It happened suddenly. A neighbor's dog had slipped under the fence and charged barking. Hope spooked hard, reared back, then bolted toward the far fence. His front legs caught in the uneven ground, and he went down hard. She ran to him, breath sharp in her chest. Mud streaked his side. One leg trembled violently. He tried to stand, failed. The vet came quickly, bandaged him, administered medicine. He's not broken, the vet said, but it's a bad sprain. He'll need rest. Weeks, maybe months. She stayed with him in the stall that night, sitting on an overturned bucket, head resting against the wall. You were doing so well, she whispered. I thought we were ready. Outside, rain tapped softly against the roof. She closed her eyes and drifted to sleep. In her dream, she saw her son, young again, riding bareback across the field, arms out, laughing. He stopped by the willow and looked at her, not speaking, just smiling. Then he whispered, Don't stop now. He needs you. When she awoke, the sun had barely risen. Hope was lying in the straw, eyes open, watching her. She smiled, tears slipping silently down her cheeks. You're not quitting, she whispered. And neither am I. That morning, she opened the window and let the breeze into the barn. She cleaned the stall, warmed fresh mash, and began again, slow stretches, soft brushes, quiet words. Not just to heal his body, but to tell him that setbacks weren't endings. As she led him, limping, back toward the light, she caught a glimpse of something tucked under the flap of the mailbox. A flyer. She pulled it out, curious. County Horse Showcase, open event, /$10, 000 grand prize. She stared at it for a long moment. Her hands began to tremble again, but not from fear. Inside the barn, Hope neighed once, as if calling her name. She folded the flyer carefully and tucked it into her coat. Hope wasn't just healing. He was preparing. The morning of the showcase arrived with a sky so clear it felt like a promise. Dew clung to the grass in glistening drops, and a soft mist drifted across the fields as if nature itself was holding its breath. The woman stood outside the barn, her hand steady as she buckled the last strap of the trailer. Hope stood beside her, stronger than he had ever looked, his golden coat brushed to soft sheen, his mane lightly braided along the neck. His leg had healed well enough. Not perfectly, but well enough. She took a deep breath, resting her forehead against his. No one expects anything from us, she whispered. That's our advantage. Hope blinked slowly, then nuzzled her hand. The fairgrounds were already alive when they arrived, loudspeakers crackling, horses neighing, trailers pulling in from every direction. Riders in crisp uniforms led sleek, muscled stallions that gleamed under the morning sun. There were banners, booths, cameras, judges. Crowds moved like tides, murmuring and pointing. When she led Hope down the ramp, heads turned. That the one from the auction, someone whispered. No way. That's the same Colt. She didn't respond. She had learned not to. Words would never explain the months they'd lived through, the fear, the quiet victories, the nights spent speaking into silence. They found their number and waited near the entry ring. The events ahead of them were elaborate, jumping, synchronized dressage, refined displays of strength and elegance. Hope didn't know tricks. He wouldn't jump, spin, or prance. What he had was presence, heart, a bond that lived in the spaces between commands. Their category was the final one, open freestyle, connection, and harmony. The prize, $10,000. When their number was called, she stepped forward into the arena, hand loose on the lead rope. The crowd hushed. Even the judges sat forward in their chairs. Hope walked slowly beside her, head held high. He didn't falter, though the noise pressed in from every side. She guided him to the center, then unhooked the rope. Gasps scattered across the bleachers. Performing off-lead required perfect trust. She stepped back. Hope stood still, watching her. Then she moved her hand gently, fingers brushing the air. Hope took a step, then another. He circled her, slow and deliberate. She lowered her eyes, then raised them again, signaling a shift. Hope turned, crossed her side, then followed her steps as she walked forward, backward, sideways. No words, just movement and breath. The arena was silent now. You could hear the wind in the flags. She paused. Kneeling slowly, she spread her arms. Hope approached, not quickly, not perfectly, but with certainty. He lowered his head until it touched her shoulder. The crowd exhaled like a wave. Some began to clap. Others simply sat, stunned by something they hadn't expected to feel. Tears rimmed the eyes of one of the judges. The announcer's voice echoed over the speakers. Contestant 37, Hope and Evelyn Winslow. Evelyn rose, brushing straw from her knees. She reached up and stroked Hope's neck, then led him quietly from the ring. Back in the holding area, people approached, some with praise, others with disbelief. But the one moment that lingered came when a young boy tugged at her coat and asked softly, was he really unwanted? She looked at the boy, then at Hope. He was never unwanted, she replied. He was just waiting to be seen. The judge's decision came an hour later. She stood quietly, her fingers curled gently around Hope's halter, as names were called. Second place went to a sleek black gelding. The crowd clapped politely. Then the announcer cleared his throat. And first place by unanimous vote for extraordinary trust, recovery, and emotional connection. He paused. Goes to Hope. The moment stretched, then shattered into cheers. People stood, applauded. Some wiped their eyes. Hope lifted his head, ears flicking at the sound. Evelyn felt the weight in her chest loosen. She didn't cry. She didn't raise her hands. She simply leaned her cheek to his neck and closed her eyes. They handed her the ribbon, then the envelope. Later that night, as the fairgrounds emptied and the moon cast silver across the fields, she walked out to the barn alone. The ribbon hung from Hope's stall, and the prize envelope sat unopened on the kitchen table. The money would save the land. That part was simple. But what truly mattered couldn't be counted. Hope rested in his stall, his body relaxed, his breath slow. When she entered, he stirred just enough to look at her. She sat beside him on a hay bale and ran her hand over his back. You weren't just saved, she said quietly. You saved me right back. She stayed there long after the world went quiet. And in that silence lived something permanent, a bond neither time nor hardship could undo. If this story touched your heart, please consider subscribing. I bring true, heartfelt stories every day.